kako vidite na intelektualce, vaše kolege, profesore Beogradskog univerziteta koji učestvuju u svemu tome, koji samo produbljuju ovu raspravu, nebitno koje su orijentacije, da li podržavaju Dražu, Tita, kako vidite to da sad bi trebalo u narednim danima veliki broj intelektualaca, ja volim da kažem intelektualaca u civilu, da krene da učestvuje u svim tim raspravama, emisijama, svemu i svačemu, a zaboravit će naravno da spomenu izdaju koja se danas dešava u doba kada oni žive.
That's right. That exactly includes the title of my book, Mannequins of Lies. There is this grandiose lie about some supposed national policy that the regime of Aleksandar Vučić is presenting. And now you have various mannequins showing themselves in one direction or another. I cannot forget that sometimes intellectuals really go in the way that is shameful. For example, a professor of sociology from the Faculty of Philosophy in Belgrade, who was a great fighter of a democratic party until 2012, wrote an entire proclamation that roughly you can read as "It's immoral to be against the European Union," which is otherwise stupid, because you transfer morality to a political position. We could draw the conclusion from that the people in Great Britain who voted to leave European Union are completely immoral, which is a completely stupidity, because that is their legitimate political position. And it was he who wrote in the newspaper Politika a few years ago about Professor Vladeta Jankovic, who then led the list of the opposition in Belgrade, that he was, quote, just a contented old man. Old age, as if we will not all grow old, and that is an argument against some political position. You see, intellectuals are turning into megaphones of current politics. However, there is another part of intellectuals who, with their silence, inaction, supporting this regime of Aleksandar Vučić, and they will now slowly begin, as this regime collapses more and more, to distance themselves from it with the story of how they have always been something like opposition of this regime. But what I want to point out is that you have intellectuals who are open propagandists of this regime, like this example of insulting a colleague based on his age, what I mentioned a little while ago, which is unworthy and not acceptable in civilization. On the other hand, you have these other nationally oriented intellectuals who silently stood on the line that the regime should not be attacked, especially that the first man should not be attacked, because they will suffer the regime retaliation. This regime is particularly afraid of the criticism from the national intelligentsia, due to its nature, and it is unfortunately they show terrible cowardice, and that enable such a scale of social disaster, and they don't like to be told that. On the contrary, they refer to some of their sentences that no one has ever heard or seen. And then it's come to concrete things. They are always somewhere on the edge of criticism of the regime. So, those are two options. The intellectuals from the Progress group have done a huge job for civic-oriented political parties, but the fact is that the politicians here look at the intellectuals as a kind of commodity, and the intellectuals themselves are to blame for allowing that, because you independently, as intellectual, should represent your opinion, but that implies that you must not expect any benefit if your opinion wins tomorrow.
Da pitam pre svega za ovu izdaju na Kosovu i Metohiji, primjenu nemačko-francuskog plana. Nedavno su bili u posjeti Srbiji i premijer Nemačke i predsjednik Francuske. Doživjeli smo to poniženje, kako ja se ne sjećam od onoga kad je Aleksandar Vučić sedeo na hoklici u Vašingtonu. Drugo, ne sjećam se, među vremena je bilo toliko veliko, do onoga da je bio u trećem redu u kom na proslavi 100 godina od pobjede u Prvom svjetskom ratu, i ovo sada poniženje, na primjer, da je on Šolca čekao pola sata da izađe iz automobila, maltene staje onda pored koni na semaforima što treba da obrišu šoferku nekom. Pa jeste, zaista je onakva beda nije viđena od hoklice ispred Donalda Trumpa u Vašingtonu. Kako je vaše viđenje? Oni su došli, posjetili Srbiju, zna se da je glavni razlog primjena nemačko-francuskog plana. Ovo su plus, su dobili gratis od subvencija do obećanja za nuklearnu deponiju od Srbije, garancije da će Rio Tinto ovde da rudari. Šolc je otvoreno rekao, mi ne garantujemo ništa, mi ne kopamo u Nemačkoj litijum, nego ćete vi tu da to radite. Mi pritom imamo te afričke zakone o rudarenju.
I kupovina ovih francuskih...
Kupovina Rafala.
Jeste, lovaca. Pa vidite...
You see, when Alexander Vučić, the president of the republic, verbally accepted the German-French plan and then confirmed its implementation with the so-called Ohrid agreement, all this suffering of Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija, what is happening with his tacit approval. These agreements provided Albin Kurti with some basic alibi, which does not mean that these persecutions and crimes against Serbs that are taking place in Kosovo and Metohija by the regime of the same Albin Kurti should be justified in front of the eyes of the whole world and with the presence of NATO forces in the form of KFOR there on the ground. But let's see who provided the cover for all that. So when all it started, the only reaction was the reaction of the People's Party, which proposed a referendum of the rejection of Franco-German plan, and I supported it. And then I was exposed to a terrifying fire propaganda, where Milomir Maric clearly emphasized the anti-Montenegrin mood with his agents provocateur in his show Chirilica and in the morning program. But please, I was attacked by both the regime and opposition leaders. Also, Dragan Đilas, the leader of the largest Serbian opposition party, said that my opposition to the Franco-German plan means that I have a policy that leads to war, which means that I was attacked by both sides, the regime and the opposition, which then follow American interests. Cannot forget that. The agreement fell apart over time, and it's good. It's good that Dragan Đilas criticized the so-called Ohrid plan before the previous election as very harmful to Serbian national interests, freedom and democracy. You see, he is a politician and his views oscillate, which is normal for a politician, because intellectuals fight for values, and their views should not oscillate, but politicians can, because they fight for influence, for power, although they should have some borders in that political meandering. I think that the basic solution lies in a kind of synthesis of the national and civil sides, which should ensure a normal environment in the country, and that means that the constitution is respected, and that means that the political responsibility of the President of the Republic, Alexander Vučić, is implied due to the betrayal and surrender of Kosovo and Metohija, and his political parties as well, which is why we should step down from power, because they have gone beyond the scope of legitimacy. What was given to them is that no one has given them legitimacy for what they are doing. The fact that they later acquired the legitimacy through manipulation, violence and the media, it's a post-situation. They never came before the people with the fact that they will betray Kosovo and Metohija. But since they won the elections by promising something else, such as better wages, higher pensions, the fight against crime, they are now behaving as if they have received trust for that betrayal of Kosovo and Metohija, and I think they should also be held criminally responsible. You know, you cannot go beyond the law without being criminally punished. Not only political responsibility is leaving power, and criminal responsibility is to see that you have broken the law, and that is not the same. And I believe that without civil pressure on them, the politicians of the regime, the government will not respect the will of the people. Absolutely, civil disobedience is needed to force the government to somehow respect the legitimacy given by the elections. I'm amazed that 30 days after the last mass protest across Serbia, the opposition parties do not want to act in the direction of civil disobedience, which is natural for them to act. It is completely legitimate, not violent, because I am known for my views on so-called passive resistance, which I advocate. But passive resistance means non-violent resistance, and not that you do nothing. 30 days have passed since the last mass protest where almost 100,000 people were present in Belgrade, and you, as the opposition, do nothing after that. Opposition parties, in my opinion, must suffer the pressure of the people, that they must stand in front of the people and in a non-party function. What does this mean? This means that you do not need to look at your own party interests, but you need to look at the wider stage, which you will create for some party interest that will come after. They need to give political legitimacy to the protests. We need to take over the protection of the people, because it is not the same when you have arrested people. We find out that the people who are protesting are arrested and that those people without political protection remain in Alexander Vucic's prisons. No, those protests should be led by MPs. I remember the demonstration in the 19th. They were led by MPs. They should be the ones who protect those protesting people with their political legitimacy, but not to wave their party flags, but to appear at protest as bearers of national sovereignty. What are MPs? Well, MPs are the bearers of national sovereignty. Alexander Vucic said, "I guarantee you that Rio Tinto will not violate environmental standards." He identified himself with Rio Tinto. Therefore, President Vucic is Rio Tinto. There is no other. We can lie and say something else or something third, but essentially he identified himself with that company. And now, if you are against Rio Tinto, then it's normal to be against Alexander Vucic. What is an issue? What is the problem? I don't see anything problematic. So, I'm unpleasantly surprised by the absence of any opposition activity. And now, they are talking that the issue will be raised in the National Assembly, which is itself is not problematic if there is this civil disobedience. But if there is not this civil disobedience and you move it all to the Assembly, it makes the form, I will quote Karl Marx, parliamentary cretinism. Please, wait. You should lead the civil disobedience, and that you try to make it recognizable with the National Assembly.
Se priča o tome da će neposlušnost i da se trudite da ona unutar Skupštine dobije svoju prepoznatljivost.